My name is Maren Whitlock. I was 36 years old the night I found out my family had planned Christmas without me. It was a Thursday evening, December 7th, and I was sitting on the edge of a narrow hotel bed outside Clarksville, Tennessee, still in my army sweatshirt, one boot on and one boot off. We had just finished a long logistics training week, the kind that leaves dust in your hair and silence in your bones. I was tired enough to sleep sitting up when my phone lit up. Tessa had added me to a group chat by mistake. At first, I smiled. For one stupid second, I thought maybe they were finally making plans early so I could come home. Then I started reading. There were 61 messages. My mother had written, "Don't invite Maren. She'll make it about the army again." My brother Calder answered, "Just tell her we're doing it on the 30th. She's used to missing things." My father didn't say anything. He just sent a thumbs up. I stared at that little blue hand longer than I should have. Somehow, his silence always knew how to hurt more than anyone else's words. I didn't type. I didn't ask why. I didn't give them the satisfaction of watching me bleed in real time. I took screenshots, one after another, while the room hummed with bad hotel heating and the smell of burnt coffee from the hallway. Then I saw the message that changed everything. Calder had written, "Closing is January 2nd. Keep her away from Hawthorne until then." My fingers went cold. Hawthorne wasn't just a house. It was my grandmother Lenora's house. The only place in my childhood where I never had to earn a chair at the table. That night, I understood something. They weren't only hiding Christmas from me. They were hiding a sale. Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet your phone battery is at 32% right now, right? If that's true, type 1. If not, type 2. Let's see whether I got it right. All right. Enough talking. Let's begin the story. After I turned the phone face down, the silence in that room felt heavier than the messages themselves. The heater under the window clicked twice, then coughed out a thin wave of warm air that smelled like dust. Somewhere down the hall, a few soldiers from my unit were laughing about dinner, their voices loose and ordinary, and for a second I hated how normal the world sounded while mine had just shifted under me. By then, I should have been used to it. My family had spent years turning my service into a flaw in my character. In my mother's version of things, I had not joined the Army National Guard because I wanted discipline, purpose, or a way to build a life without begging for help. I had joined because I was restless, because I was difficult to count on, because I liked having an excuse to leave. That was always the word she used. Excuse. If I missed Easter because of drill weekend, it was an excuse. If I could not get home from my father's knee surgery until 2 days later, it was an excuse. If I stepped outside during dinner to answer a call from my commander, my mother would lower her fork and look at me like I had invited the whole army into her dining room. "You always have somewhere else to be, Maren," she would say, softly, almost sadly. That was the trick. She never had to sound cruel when she could sound disappointed. What no one in that family ever seemed to remember was that I was still the person they called when something had to be handled. When Calder's insurance paperwork got denied, he sent the forms to me because I was better with that stuff. When Tessa needed money to secure her wedding venue, I wired her $3,000 and told her she could pay me back when things calmed down. They never did. When my father came home from surgery, I burned through personal leave from my civilian job, drove 6 hours, slept on the couch, and wrote his medication schedule in black marker on a sheet of printer paper taped to the fridge. Over 5 years, I had sent home $27,400. I knew the number because numbers were cleaner than excuses. Numbers did not sigh. Numbers did not rewrite themselves at Thanksgiving. Still, somehow, I was the absent daughter. Calder was busy, which meant important. Tessa was overwhelmed, which meant delicate. My father was quiet, which meant tired. But I was unavailable, and that meant selfish. That was the family math. Sitting there in Tennessee, I finally understood they had not cut me out all at once. They had done it in small, reasonable-looking pieces. A missed holiday, a joke about my uniform, a chair not saved, a call not returned. Until one day, they could plan Christmas without me, and convince themselves I had chosen not to come. That was why the memory of the previous Christmas came back so sharply. Not as a full scene at first, but in pieces. The glare of headlights on wet pavement, the ache between my shoulders after too many hours behind the wheel, the paper cup of gas station coffee cooling in the cup holder because I was too nervous to drink it. They had told me Christmas would be on December 30th that year. My mother said it like she was doing something generous. "We moved it so you can be included, Maren." I believed her. I wanted to believe her badly enough that I ignored the small pause before she said included. I packed a duffel bag after duty, changed in a restroom off the interstate, and drove from Tennessee to Pennsylvania with one goal in my head: get there before dinner. I even wore the green wool sweater Grandma Lenora had bought me years earlier, the one with wooden buttons and sleeves that were always a little too long. She used to say it made me look like I belonged in a Christmas card instead of a motor pool. The drive took a little over 10 hours. By the time I turned onto my parents' street in Carlisle, my eyes burned and my hands had that stiff, cold feeling from gripping the steering wheel too tightly. Their house was lit from the outside, but when I parked, I noticed the living room was dim. No music, no voices, no one opening the door before I reached the porch. I knocked first, then I used my key. The smell hit me before anything else. Roast beef, cinnamon, pine candles, and that tired sweetness of a party already over. The dining room table had been wiped clean. Foil-covered leftovers sat stacked in the refrigerator. A trash bag near the back door bulged with wrapping paper and paper plates. In the living room, the tree lights were still blinking, cheerful and stupid, like they had not gotten the message. For a few seconds, I just stood there with my duffel bag hanging from my shoulder. My mother answered on the third call. "Oh, honey," she said too quickly. "We thought your unit had you tied up again." In the background, I heard Tessa laugh. Not loudly, just enough. I remember apologizing. That is the part I hate most when I think about it now. I said I was sorry, as if I had inconvenienced them by arriving on the day they gave me. My father never came to the phone. Calder sent a text the next morning. "Bad timing, sis. Next year." Back then, I told myself it had been confusion. A family mistake. A holiday miscommunication made worse by everyone being tired. But sitting in that hotel room a year later, reading those messages, I finally understood. They had not failed to wait for me. They had practiced it. Once I understood that, I stopped reading the messages like a daughter and started reading them like evidence. I sat up straighter on the hotel bed, pulled my laptop from my duffel, and opened the screenshots one by one. I ignored the jokes about my schedule. I ignored the little digs about my uniform. I looked for dates, names, addresses, anything too specific to be ordinary family gossip. That was when Hawthorne stopped being a word in a text and became a warning. Hawthorne meant 18 Hawthorne Lane, a small red brick house on the older side of Carlisle, with black shutters, a sloping back porch, and an apple tree behind the kitchen window. It had belonged to my grandmother Lenora, not an estate asset. The way my mother liked to say when she wanted something sentimental to sound practical. Her house, her kitchen, her sticky screen door, her narrow hallway with old-school pictures no one else cared enough to keep. When I was little, Hawthorne was where I went when my own house felt too loud, even in silence. Grandma Lenora never asked me to explain myself the second I walked in. She would just hand me a dish towel and say, "If you're going to look troubled in my kitchen, you might as well dry the plates." That was how she loved people. She gave them something simple to do until they were ready to speak. I opened a real estate site and typed in the address. There it was, 18 Hawthorne Lane. Listed at 318,0. 4 bedrooms, 2 baths. Charming estate property with development potential. The photos looked too bright, like someone had scrubbed the life out of every room. Grandma's curtains were gone. The maple table was missing from the kitchen. Someone had painted the front door a flat gray, as if even color had been too personal. Then I saw the status. Pending. I scrolled back through Calder's messages until I found the buyer's name. Ellis Rourke, retired dentist. Cash offer. Tessa had mentioned it, like she was talking about the weather. My phone rang before I could breathe through it. Ruth Bellamy. She had lived next door to Grandma Lenora for 30 years and still sent me birthday cards with $5 bills inside. I answered on the second ring. Maren, she said quietly. There's a for sale sign in your grandmother's yard. Your brother was here yesterday loading boxes into a truck. I closed my eyes. What boxes? A pause. Lenora's things, honey. That was when the hurt changed shape. It stopped being about Christmas. It stopped being about being left out. They were not just selling a house. They were erasing her before I could get home. I did not call my mother after Ruth hung up. I did not call Calder. There are moments when a phone call is just a place for people to practice lying to you, and I had heard enough rehearsals in my life. Instead, I opened the Cumberland County Recorder of Deeds website. I knew enough about public records to understand that families could lie, but filed documents usually could not. Names could be twisted at dinner tables. Promises could be softened, denied, or buried under phrases like, "That's not what we meant." But a recorded deed was different. It did not care who had been invited to Christmas. It did not care who cried first. It only showed what had been signed. I typed in the address slowly, because my hands had started to shake, and I did not want a typo to decide what I saw. 18 Hawthorne Lane. The search took maybe 3 seconds. It felt longer. A list of documents appeared. Tax assessment, prior transfer, mortgage release. Then one line caught my eye. Warranty deed, filed 9 years earlier. I clicked it. The PDF opened in a new window, gray and white, stamped with the county seal at the top. For a second, I just stared at the page without reading it. Legal documents have a way of making ordinary truth look cold and official. Names, dates, parcel numbers, signatures. No room for tone. No room for excuses. Then I found the grantor. Lenora my belle. My grandmother's full name. Not Grandma. Not Lenora from Hawthorne. Lenora May Bell. Written in black ink like a woman who had known exactly what she was doing. I kept reading. Grantees. Celeste Whitlock and Maren Elise Whitlock. Tenants in common. I stopped breathing. I read it again. Celeste Whitlock and Maren Elise Whitlock. Not Calder. Not Tessa. Not my father. Me. My full legal name sat there on the deed, clean and undeniable. Maren Elise Whitlock. Recorded co-owner of 18 Hawthorne Lane. It was not a family rumor. It was not a vague promise made over iced tea in a summer kitchen. It was not one of those things relatives say after funerals and then quietly forget when money gets involved. It was filed, recorded, public. I leaned back from the laptop and pressed both palms against my knees, the way I had done in hospital waiting rooms, briefing rooms, and every family dinner where I had trained myself not to react. Only this time, the stillness was different. For years, I had thought Grandma Lenora left me memories because that was all she had the power to protect. I was wrong. She had left me standing. Not loudly, not dramatically, not with a speech anyone could twist. She had done it in the one place my family could not interrupt her. County records. Seeing that deed pulled me backward 9 years, to a Tuesday morning in early September, 2 weeks before my first long activation. I was 27 then, still new enough in uniform that I checked my ribbons twice before walking into a room, still young enough to believe that if I explained myself clearly, my family might finally understand me. Grandma Lenora had called the night before and told me to come by Hawthorne before noon. "Where's something you can sit in?" she said. That was all. I thought she needed help moving furniture or changing the storm windows before fall settled in. With Lenora, an invitation usually came disguised as a chore. So I drove to Carlisle in jeans and an old army hoodie, expecting dust, coffee, and maybe a lecture about eating real meals while I was away. Instead, she was waiting on the porch with her purse already in her lap. Her hair was pinned back. She had lipstick on. Not much, just enough to tell me this was not about storm windows. We have an appointment, she said. With who? A man who uses too many words for simple things. That was Grandma Lenora's way of saying attorney. His office sat between a pharmacy and a shoe repair shop downtown. One of those narrow Pennsylvania buildings with old brass handles and carpet that had seen too many winters. The attorney's name was Miss Alden Price. He spoke gently, but every paper in front of him was arranged with the kind of precision that made me sit straighter. I remember looking at Grandma, across the desk, confused and a little embarrassed. Money was not something we discussed in my family, unless someone was using it to win an argument. Lenora reached over and touched my wrist. Your mother knows how to turn need into obligation, she said quietly. Your father knows how to disappear inside silence. Calder has been rescued so many times he thinks rescue is a birthright. And Tessa, she paused. Tessa survives by standing wherever the room is warmest. I did not know what to say. Then Mr. Price slid the deed toward me. Grandma explained that Hawthorne would not be left to chance. She was adding my name while she was alive, while no one could claim she had been confused, pressured, or misunderstood. I asked her why me. I hated how small my voice sounded. She looked almost angry then. Because you are the one they will tell to be reasonable, she said. You are the one they will ask to sacrifice, and then call selfish if you hesitate. I signed because she asked me to. I did not fully understand the weight of it. At 27, I thought she was giving me protection for someday. I did not realize someday would arrive wearing Christmas lights. I sat there staring at the last two words, county records, until my eyes stopped focusing on the screen. Grandma Lenora had not guessed wrong about them. Not about my mother, not about Calder, not about me. She had seen the shape of our family long before I had the courage to name it. The next piece came from Tessa. She called at 11:18 that night. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me knew she was not calling to comfort me. Tessa never reached for the truth, unless it had already started burning her fingers. Maren, she whispered, are you mad? That was such a small question for what they had done that I nearly laughed. I'm informed, I said. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long moment. Then I heard a door close on her end, followed by the faint rush of water. She had probably locked herself in a bathroom, the only private room left in that house. I didn't know they hadn't told you about the sale, she said. The sale of the house I co-own? Another silence. That silence told me more than her words did. Tessa. She exhaled hard. Calder's in trouble. Of course he was. Not sick. Not grieving. Not trapped by something no one could control. In trouble. His solar panel company had collapsed in August after 2 bad contracts and 1 lawsuit from a supplier. He owed $146,000. My mother had co-signed a bridge loan because Calder told her the business only needed 60 days to stabilize. 60 days had turned into 4 months. The lender had started calling. My mother's retirement account was tied up in ways she did not want to explain. My father knew. Tessa knew some of it. And somehow, the solution they landed on was Grandma Lenora's house. Not their savings. Not Calder's truck. Not the vacation property he bragged about renting every summer. Hawthorne, the place Grandma had protected because she knew exactly what they would do when one of their chosen people fell through the floor. They said you'd understand, Tessa murmured. Because you're practical. Practical. That word landed harder than selfish. Practical meant they had already decided my pain was manageable. Practical meant I would be asked to give something up neatly, quietly, without making the people who hurt me feel embarrassed. I looked at the deed on my laptop again. My name had not moved. It did not blink. It did not soften, because Calder was failing, or because my mother was scared. For the first time that night, I understood the whole design. They had not forgotten me. They had planned around me. Christmas was not the reason I was left out. My uniform was not the reason. My distance was not the reason. My signature was. Once I understood that, something in me went very quiet. Not calm exactly. Calm sounds peaceful. This was different. It was the kind of quiet I had learned in uniform, the silence that comes right before you stop reacting and start organizing. My family had turned Christmas into cover, Calder's debt into emergency, my grandmother's house into collateral, and me into the one loose end they thought they could manage with guilt and timing. I closed the group chat and opened a new folder on my laptop. Hawthorne. Then I made subfolders the way I would build a packet for an operation. Deed, listing, texts, call logs, buyer, timeline. It looked cold on the screen, almost too cold for what it was. But I had learned a long time ago that emotion does not protect you unless you give it structure. Hurt without structure becomes a phone call you regret. Anger without structure becomes a paragraph someone forwards around the family to prove you are unstable. So I gave mine folders. I saved the deed first, then the listing, then every screenshot from the group chat, including the messages where they joked about keeping me away, where Calder mentioned the closing, where my mother agreed without using my name. I wrote down the time Ruth called and what she said about the boxes. I took a screenshot of Tessa's call log and typed a summary while her words were still fresh in my head. Calder's company collapsed in August. Debt, $146,000. Celeste co-signed bridge loan. Closing planned January 2. Maren not informed. Seeing my own name in the third person made my stomach turn, but it helped. It put distance between me and the part of me that still wanted to ask my mother why. Why she had not called. Why my father had stayed silent. Why my brother's mistakes always became a family crisis, while my pain became an inconvenience. At 12:07 a.m., I emailed everything to Victor Harlan. Victor had been a JAG officer years before, then became a civilian attorney in Harrisburg. I knew him through a veterans legal clinic where I had volunteered twice a month, helping younger soldiers untangle landlord issues and employment paperwork. He was not warm, exactly, but he was steady, and at that moment, steady mattered more than kind. His reply came at 12:31. Maren, do not sign anything. Do not speak to the realtor alone. Do not discuss this by phone with family. Send me the full deed and any listing documents you have. Then, 5 minutes later, another message appeared. They can dislike your uniform. They cannot sell around your signature. I read that sentence 3 times. For years, my uniform had been used as proof that I did not belong where they were. That night, it reminded me of something else. I knew how to hold a line. By morning, I had slept maybe 90 minutes. The hotel curtains were still pulled shut, but a thin gray line of daylight had found its way around the edges, and my laptop was open on the small desk like it had been waiting for me to become someone different. Victor called at 7:14. His voice was already awake. I reviewed the deed, he said. You are a recorded co-owner. Do not let anyone frame this as a misunderstanding. I sat down slowly. Can they close without me? Not legally, not for the whole property, but people try things when they assume the quiet person will stay quiet. That sentence settled somewhere deep. After we hung up, Victor sent me a draft email to the listing agent. Her name was Paige Donnelly, with Donnelly and Crane Realty. Her photo on the listing showed a woman in a navy blazer, blonde hair tucked behind one ear, smiling like every house had a happy ending if the lighting was right. I copied her email address and stared at the blank message window longer than necessary. Part of me still expected my mother's voice to rise up in my head and tell me I was being dramatic, difficult, embarrassing. But then I looked at the listing photos again and saw Grandma Lenora's empty kitchen, stripped down for strangers, and the hesitation left me. I wrote exactly what Victor told me to write. Miss Donnelly, my name is Maren Elise Whitlock. I am a recorded co-owner of 18 Hawthorne Lane, Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I have not consented to the sale of this property, have not signed any transfer documents, and was not informed of the pending transaction. All further communication regarding this matter should go through my attorney, Victor Harlan. I attached the deed, the listing screenshot, the group chat message about the January 2nd closing. Then I hit send. Nothing happened at first. That was the strange part about protecting yourself. The room did not shake. No one burst through the door. There was only a sent message sitting quietly in my outbox, carrying more power than every argument I had ever lost at my parents' table. Paige called 22 minutes later. "Sergeant Whitlock?" she asked, and her voice had changed from professional warmth to careful control. "Yes, I need to confirm something. You are saying you did not authorize this listing? I am saying my name is on the deed, and no one asked me anything." I heard paper moving on her end, then typing. "We pulled the preliminary title report," she said after a moment. "Your name appears as a vested owner." Vested owner. 2 words my family had spent years pretending did not exist. Paige exhaled. "We cannot proceed with the closing as currently structured." I closed my eyes, not from relief exactly, but from the weight of finally hearing someone outside my family say the truth out loud. The sale had not ended, but it had stopped moving without me. I thought Paige's call would make them pause. For almost half a day, it did. The group chat went silent. No new jokes, no new plans, no little updates from Tessa about food or decorations or who was bringing pie. Just a long, unnatural quiet that felt less like reflection and more like people whispering in another room. Then, at 6:42 that evening, my mother emailed me. The subject line was soft enough to be insulting. "Holiday estate update." No phone call, no apology, no acknowledgement that I had found the listing, spoken to the realtor, or stopped the closing from sliding past me like a train in the dark. Just an email with 1 attachment and 3 sentences. "Maren, I know things feel tense right now. This is only routine paperwork related to your grandmother's estate. Please sign before Christmas Eve so we can avoid unnecessary stress for everyone." For everyone. I stared at those 2 words for a long time. Not for Hawthorne, not for Grandma Lenora, not for me. For everyone, which in my family usually meant for the person who had created the problem and the people expected to clean around it. The attachment was named Holiday, Estate, Update, PDF. I did not open it on my phone. That was the old version of me, the version that tried to be efficient, agreeable, easy, the version who signed school forms quickly, sent money quietly, and apologized before anyone asked her to. Instead, I forwarded it to Victor first. Then I downloaded it on my laptop and opened it slowly. It was not an estate update. It was a deed package. The first page listed the buyer, Ellis Rourke. Purchase price, $309,500. Closing date, January 2. The property description was formal and cold, all parcel numbers and boundary lines, but I knew every inch of what those lines held. The porch where Grandma drank coffee, the kitchen window over the sink, the hallway where my childhood photo still hung until someone decided strangers should not see it. Then I reached the signature page. My name was there, Maren Elise Whitlock, printed neatly above a blank line. The payment instructions were attached at the end. Net proceeds to be wired to an account ending in 8,841. Celeste Whitlock. There was no division shown, no explanation, no letter saying, "We were wrong not to tell you." No attempt to ask what I wanted. They had not sent me paperwork. They had sent me a trap wrapped in holiday language. And the ugliest part was how well they knew me. They knew I was trained to respect forms, dates, procedures, deadlines. They knew I read instructions and completed tasks. They were counting on the soldier in me to obey before the daughter in me had time to grieve. I closed the PDF and sat very still. Then I forwarded the whole thing to Victor with 1 sentence. "They just tried to get my signature." Victor answered that night with 2 words first. "Do nothing." Then, 10 minutes later, he sent a formal notice to Paige, the title company, and the closing attorney listed in the PDF. By Monday morning, the transaction had a bright red flag attached to it. By Tuesday, Paige confirmed in writing that no closing could move forward without my consent. After that, my family stopped using email. They went back to silence, the old family language. Christmas morning arrived cold and clear. I was still in Tennessee, off duty for the day, sitting at the small desk in my hotel room with gas station coffee and a cinnamon roll that tasted mostly like cardboard. I had not been invited anywhere. No one had called to ask if I was eating alone. My mother had not mentioned the paperwork again. For a few hours, I thought maybe shame had finally found them. Then Tessa texted me at DC's. It was not meant for me. I knew that immediately because it was a screenshot from another group chat, one without my name at the top. In it, my mother had written, "Make the house look warm. Ellis may still come by after church if Paige can calm everyone down." Calder replied, "Keep it simple. Maren thinks we're still doing the 30th. Below that, my father had written, "No arguments today." I looked at those 3 messages for a long time. No arguments today. Not no lies. Not no sale. Not no using your dead mother's house to clean up your son's debt. Just no arguments, as if peace meant everyone cooperating with the deception. Tessa sent another message 1 second later. "Wrong thread. I'm sorry." I almost laughed then. Not because anything was funny, but because the truth had become almost clumsy in its effort to reach me. I opened the original Christmas group chat, the one they still had not realized I had been reading from the beginning, and typed 1 sentence. "Merry Christmas. Paige Donnelly will explain why the closing stopped." I did not add an exclamation point. I did not accuse. I did not mention Calder's debt, my mother's loan, or the PDF with my signature line waiting like bait. I just sent the sentence and placed the phone beside my coffee. For 8 minutes, nothing happened. Then my screen lit up. Calder called first. Then my mother. Then Calder again. Then my father, which surprised me more than all the rest. In the next 90 minutes, I received 46 calls, 12 voicemails, and enough text messages to tell me exactly who had been counting on my silence. Calder called me selfish. My mother said I was destroying the family on Christmas. My father wrote, "Call your mother." I typed back only once. "Tell her to call my attorney." Then I turned the phone face down and let the quiet return. Only this time, it did not feel empty. It felt earned. The January 2nd closing never happened. Paige confirmed it in a short email that afternoon, copied to Victor and the title company. Ellis Rourke withdrew his offer 2 days later. I did not blame him. Most buyers want a house, not a family war with parcel numbers attached. By February, Calder's lender had started the process everyone had been trying to outrun, and for once, no one could turn his panic into my responsibility. My mother kept sending messages through Tessa at first, then through my father, then through long voicemails, where she used words like healing and family unity, without ever once saying the words I had been waiting for. "We lied to you." In April, we sat across from each other in a mediation room in Harrisburg, fluorescent lights, bad coffee, a box of tissues in the center of the table that nobody touched. Calder looked smaller than I remembered, not humble exactly, just reduced by consequences. My father kept his hands folded. My mother wore the same pearl earrings she wore to church and spoke in a voice that made injury sound like virtue. "We didn't invite you because you always act like you're above us now," she said. For years, that sentence might have worked. It would have made me explain. Defend. Apologize for tone before anyone apologized for harm. This time, I only looked at her. "No," I said. "You didn't invite me because my name was the one thing you couldn't get around." The room went still. Victor laid out 2 options. We could sell Hawthorne properly, with a clean title and a fair division. Or I could buy out my mother's share, based on an independent appraisal. My mother cried when I chose the second option, but not because she loved the house. She cried because for the first time, the family story could not be edited around me. It took 3 months, a VA-backed loan, my savings, and more paperwork than I want to remember. But by late July, 18 Hawthorne Lane was mine. I did not turn it into a shrine. Grandma Lenora would have hated that. I fixed the porch, repainted the gray front door a deep blue, put the maple table back where it belonged after Ruth found it in Calder's storage unit and called me before he could sell it. By fall, Hawthorne had 3 clean bedrooms, a stocked pantry, and a small sign by the door, Lenora House. Weekend stays for women veterans transitioning home. The first night I slept there alone. I made tea in Grandma's kitchen and stood barefoot on the old floorboards, listening to the house settle around me. I used to think homecoming meant someone opening the door for you. Now I know better. Sometimes, homecoming is finding the key, turning it yourself, and stepping inside without asking anyone for permission. What Maren's story teaches us is that family is not proven by a shared last name, a holiday table, or the words people use when they want something from you. Family is proven in the moments when your dignity is inconvenient to them. Sometimes the deepest betrayal does not come with shouting. Sometimes it arrives quietly, dressed as being practical, keeping the peace, or doing what's best for everyone. And if you have spent your life being the responsible one, the strong one, the one who always understands, people may begin to believe your sacrifice is automatic. But love should never require you to disappear. Maren did not win because she was cruel. She won because she stopped confusing silence with loyalty. She stopped asking people who had excluded her to explain her worth. She looked at the truth, protected what mattered, and chose peace with boundaries instead of approval without respect. That is a lesson many people learn late in life. You can love your family and still refuse to be used by them. You can honor where you came from and still protect where you are going. You can forgive some things in your heart without handing people the keys to hurt you again. Real healing is not always a reunion. Sometimes it is a locked door. Sometimes it is a signed paper. Sometimes it is standing in a quiet kitchen and realizing you no longer need permission to belong. If this story touched something in you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever been treated like the difficult one just because you finally said no? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want more stories about family betrayal, resilience, and finding strength after being underestimated, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to remember their worth.